Hello and welcome to Wednesday Worship. I'm Lucille Rowse, a local preacher in the Falmouth and Gwinnett Methodist Circuit.
And I'm Tom, and I'm a worship leader at Stithians Methodist Church. We've been looking at some stunning images of reflections across salt flats or salt lakes. So after last week's Wednesday Worship, when Hannah brought us her thoughts about being a light for Christ on earth, we're going to reflect for a minute or two today on what the Bible said and what Jesus had to say about being the salt of the earth.
Salt is something we use every day in our cooking. Not too much, not too little. Too much or too little can spoil the taste of our food. I don't know if anyone knows who said next to water and air, salt is the most necessary thing in life. It was Mahatma Gandhi. And in 1930 he did a march, a peaceful protest march against the British monopoly of colonial India. At that time, even though salt was very readily available on the coast where the sea would simply evaporate and leave salt crystals on the shore, the people were forced to purchase their salt from the colonial government, and collecting it as a natural resource was made illegal. Gandhi marched to a place called Dandi, a coastal town, to collect salt without paying tax. The march lasted about 24 days and I think covered 240 miles. And his supporters increased as he passed through villages, and they became quite a force to be reckoned with. The march, I believe, grew actually to be about 2 miles long, but always remained faithful. Gandhi himself named it the Salt Sayarahat, translated to mean peace, which is born of truth and love. Sadly, lives were lost and Gandhi himself was imprisoned, but the British government eventually gave in and Gandhi's actions really did make a difference.
Well, we remember, don't we? Because we were on holiday in India a few years ago now, and we were fortunate enough to visit Gandhi's final resting place.
We did.
And what was memorable, I think, about it was the simplicity of the place. The memorial itself was a very simple one, which reflected Gandhi's life.
It did. And I think also I remember being very surprised at how very peaceful it was, despite the thousands of visitors that came there every day. There was a plaque, I think, wasn't there? I seem to remember, and which said his final words were, "My God." And I just think, as I say, he was someone who made such a big difference, and someone who truly was salt and light in the world. I think we might have digressed ever so slightly, don't you?
Just a bit, yeah.
Perhaps we should hear what the Bible has to say about being salt.
Then in Leviticus chapter 2, verse 13 says, "Season all your grain offerings with salt. Do not leave the salt of the covenant of your Lord out of your grain offerings. Add salt to all your offerings."
So salt in the Bible was a valued and a very valuable commodity. It's one of the reasons God required a sacrifice as well as a great sacrifice to give up. Salt was an essential of life in ancient times and used by many cultures for many things, as a seasoning, a disinfectant, preservative, and of course a currency. So when God required salt to be a part of their grain offering, it showed that the relationship that God wanted with his people and how God wanted to preserve heavenly values on earth. Salt is apparently mentioned in the Bible 40 times, over 40 times, for all sorts of reasons, including its use in incense and, believe it or not, rubbing onto newborn babies.
Poor baby.
But perhaps the most well-known reference to salt in the Bible is Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, found in Matthew's Gospel.
Found in Matthew chapter 5. Verse 13 says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything, except to be thrown out and trampled by men."
All women.
All women, yeah. I like my food, as
You
I
do?
think you will attest.
I could, yes.
But I don't put much salt on. I don't eat a lot of salt.
Generally, no.
But having said that, there are one or two things where I think salt is essential, to my mind anyway, and I'm thinking particularly of roast potatoes,
Yes, I have to agree with
chips, of course,
that. Of course.
and even sometimes pasties.
My homemade pasties.
Well,
no.
they're always lovely, of course, but yes, sometimes even some additional seasoning to them. But that saltiness, which you experience when you're eating something, a bit on potatoes or whatever, it just makes them taste that much nicer, doesn't it?
It brings the flavour out, doesn't it?
But if the salt wasn't salty anymore, if it had lost its saltiness, then it wouldn't be doing what it was supposed to be doing. It would be useless, really, wouldn't it? It wouldn't have its purpose.
No. And that is a part of that reading from Matthew, isn't it? The passage talks about salt losing its flavour. And in those Bible times, if people noticed that salt was losing its flavour or its preserving qualities, they would simply throw it out onto the streets and it would get trampled underfoot because it was no longer good for them. It sounds rather harsh, doesn't it? But if we lose our flavour, those qualities that preserve and share God's love through our actions and our influence, we are not being the people that God wants us to be, and in fact the people that God needs us to be. If my cooking salt or my salt mill gets damp, of course it's useless. It won't do what it's supposed to do and make a difference or improve anything. So thinking about all those properties of salt, Jesus is saying to his disciples, you are the salt of the world. I see you and God sees you as precious, of great worth. He's saying that we are valued, and we are what will bring and maintain the flavour of God's love in the world. And let's face it, the world very much needs to know that love, doesn't it? But just one little salt crystal or a very small pinch of salt can make all the difference. And so can we by sharing just a little bit of God's amazing love. We are what will bring that flavour of hope and joy, the hope and joy of God that God wants the world to know. I came across a meditation by John Ortberg, which I think very simply says a lot about what being salt is. Every time you love, every time you include someone who's lonely, encourage someone who's defeated, every time you challenge someone who's wandering off the path, every time you serve the under-resourced, it is a sign that the kingdom is once more breaking into the world.
Shall we close with a prayer? Gracious Lord, what a high calling you have given us to be the salt of the earth. You have placed us in this world so that we might add flavour, helping the world to experience through us a small taste of your kingdom. So we ask, help us, Lord, to be salty people. May your words and deeds reflect your character. May people taste your kingdom through us. Amen.
Amen. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Bye-bye.